The purpose of our gathering this evening is to listen to the pastor of a congregation from Minnesota, who has been on the front lines of ICE activity in Minnesota, and glean lessons learned to help us prepare our congregations here in Denver. So during our time together this evening, we'll open in prayer, walk through 5 prepared questions, which will be followed by time for questions from participants, and then we will close. Before I start with the intro, I'd like to have Reverend Allison Sawtelle, who is also from Wash Park, do an opening prayer for us.
Let's be in prayer. O Holy One, we are gathered this evening offering prayers of gratitude. We are grateful for the good people of Minneapolis and our sibling church, Lyndale UCC, and its service during those times of violence, violation, and fear. We are grateful, Holy One, for all of them, for their courage, the bearing of witness, for their protecting, comforting, feeding, caring for their neighbors and complete strangers. We are grateful for their wisdom. We are gathered offering prayers of gratitude. May we also listen, learn, grow in knowledge and courage. We are grateful for the technology and for those who work it, which allows us to be in community over the miles, for we are connected to one another. We are not alone. We lean on each other's experience, strength, and love. And we lean into your call, Holy One, to love our neighbors as ourselves, even as we continue to expand our notion of neighbor that goes far beyond our walls and our communities. We gather with grateful hearts, and we pray in all your holy names. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. So the church Reverend Rebecca is from in Minneapolis is Lyndale UCC. My husband Scott and I attended Lyndale for 10 plus years when we lived in the Minneapolis area. During COVID, a group of us got the 2 churches together for 10 Zoom sessions of learning and discussing Revolutionary Love by Valerie Kaur. So the churches are tied by more than just Scott and I now. And now it is truly my pleasure and honor to introduce Reverend Dr. Rebecca Voelkel. She is an ordained minister. I'm starting to cry. You may forget, Rebecca, how much I cry, but she is an ordained minister in the UCC and currently serves as the director of the Center for Sustainable Justice. She is a theologian, pastor, and movement builder who specializes in coalition and collaborative partnerships across movements for justice. And I will say I know she's been doing justice work forever, since she was young. I am blessed to be able to call her a dear friend since meeting her at Lyndale. I've learned a lot from her over the years and look forward to learning about their recent experiences with ICE tonight. So thank you, Rebecca, for being here.
Thank you.
So let's start with the questions. The first question is, can you walk us through what actually happened in your context, including what you expected, what surprised you, and what you wish you had known beforehand to be better prepared?
Well, before I answer your question, I just want to, part of my answer is going to be rooted in relationship. And so I just want to start by a word of deep, deep gratitude to you, Diane, and for Wash Park. Malcolm Himshoot is a dear chosen family. We're raising our children as cousins and siblings, and so I feel a deep, deep sense of gratitude to Wash Park for years and years and years, and such deep love for you, Diane, and for Scott. And so if nothing else you take away from this evening, the importance of relationship is at the core of absolutely everything I'm gonna say. Um, I want to say some factual pieces um, about what happened here in Minnesota. It's important to sort of do two pieces of context setting. One is the context of Tim Walz, the Minnesota governor, running as the vice presidential candidate against the Trump Vance ticket. And the other, and so we knew the minute that Donald Trump was elected president that there was very clear indication that a kind of I don't know, getting back at Minnesota as Walz as one of the kind of political enemies. So we knew from the moment of the election in November of 2024 that there was very much likely going to be targeted campaign against Minnesota. The other piece of sort of historical context that is important is and don't get too scared. I'm going to go back about 150 years, but I'm not going to belabor this very long. But the sacred geography and the history of this place is also really, really important to this story. There has been the site of creation for Dakota people is a place called Bedote. It is the confluence of the Mississippi and Minnesota rivers, known as the site of creation. And that site of creation was also the site of the concentration camp during the U.S. Dakota War. And that same site is the site where the Whipple building, which is the federal building where the immigration court and the point of deportation is, and all of that is within less than half a mile. And there has been a strong and really brilliant, badass indigenous organizing here in the Twin Cities, and leaders in that movement, particularly Pastor Jim Bear Jacobs, talks about that sacred geography as the point of Genesis and genocide. And it is this historic place of resistance as well as family separation. So that's one historical piece. The other historical piece is, I wonder, Steve, could I ask you to put yourself on mute?
Oh, goodness, I'm so sorry.
That's all right. Thank you so much. The other piece that's important that's connected to that long history of indigenous organizing, the American Indian movement was founded here in Minneapolis, and the work that there was a lot of organizing against the Dakota Access Pipeline, and organizing against the Line 3 pipeline. And then, of course, we have this long history of state killing of unarmed Black folks, Jamar Clark, Philando Castile, and then most famously, George Floyd. And so the other point of context is the incredibly brilliant, long-standing Black and Indigenous-led organizing that religious communities have been acting in followership and solidarity with. As I say, for a long time, the Whipple building, in fact, is named after an Episcopal bishop who originally there were 303 Dakota men condemned to death during the U.S. Dakota War. and only 38 of them were executed on December 26th, 1862, because Bishop Whipple advocated for the 265 or so men to be exonerated. He advocated with President Lincoln. So there's this long history of religious folks in followership of Black and Indigenous organizing. So those two pieces of historical context are really, really important to the story. So the minute that we started in January of 2025, beginning to meet as a multi-faith movement and start talking about, it wasn't a matter of if, but when there was some sort of, occupation or attack on Minnesota. And so that would be the first thing that I would say about the history of us is, um, uh, I'm really glad you're doing these kinds of educational pieces. The early planning and relationship building is just so critical. Um, and so Operation Metro Surge started in December of 2025. Um, it saw 3,000 ICE officers and Customs and Border Patrol officers deployed in the Twin Cities. To give you some degree of context, the prior to that, the ICE occupation in Chicago. Chicago is a city probably 8 to 9 times larger than the Twin Cities. And at the height of their ICE surge, they had 800 ICE officers in Chicago. We are a city, cities 8 times smaller, and at the height we had 3,000 ICE officers. And so what we saw happen between December of 2025 and really till about mid-March of this year, 2026, we saw every single morning from the Whipple building, cars and cars and cars of with out-of-state license plates drive out of the Whipple building to be deployed onto the streets of the Twin Cities. And it didn't take us super long to begin to craft a response. But those teams would usually have 3 or 4 SUVs, descend upon someplace and violently, with masks covering their faces, go in and try and violently take someone from either businesses or their homes. A lot of it, they detained 4,000 people, and it looks like less than 15% of those were people that had any sort of criminal, record. And pretty soon, we started to see multiple ways of the community responding. The first way is that I think you all saw, everybody started having whistles. And we started at church passing out whistles. They were literally on the altar. And, during the offering, we kind of did a reverse offering, like take the whistles. And very quickly, people started creating signal chats that were very hyper local. They were neighborhood based, and very quickly people started when there was this sort of these ICE vehicles would descend on the neighborhood. People would take pictures of the license plates. And there were people at the Whipple building taking pictures of the license plates of people leaving the Whipple building. And so there was this pretty quickly trying to track where all of these ICE agents were going. And there were people who became trained in legal observers. We had over the course of 2025, we trained about 30,000 people in non-cooperation, in how to be legal observers, on know your rights. The immigrant communities were trained in know your rights, and allied communities, and how is it to be a legal observer. So pretty quickly, this like signal connected neighborhood groups, people would, when they would see an ICE vehicle, follow it. And when there was an ICE incursion, people would, on a signal group, send where it was latest was happening, and people would rush and like blow their whistles and film. The filming of what was happening was critically important. And so there was that immediate, rapid response was one prong of the response. And then pretty quickly, as people started to be kidnapped, as people started to go into hiding to avoid being kidnapped, the other piece that happened was this again signal chat, hyper local mutual aid efforts. And I know I'm telling you things that you all know, but churches and synagogues and mosques and non-affiliated people, started packing, food. And it for the month of February, for instance, I think we did over $15 million in rental assistance. And these mutual aid funds started popping up. So Lyndale, the one that you all supported so generously, dispersed probably about $300,000 in monies that have come from all over the country. And some of the networks to disperse that money, literally, like there's one organization called Neighbors Helping Neighbors, and Anna Stamborski literally rang the doorbell of all of her neighbors on the like 2 block area surrounding her house, and trying to figure out who needed help and who had help to give. And from that has grown this cities-wide mutual aid fund, where people in all of their neighborhoods created these hyper local groups where people found out like there was a mother who was in the process of nursing a 3-month-old who was kidnapped and deported. And so the one of the La Leche kind of milk banks, people started bringing breast milk for this 3-month-old who was suddenly without her mother who was breastfeeding her. And I mean, so that kind of, how do we figure out what the needs are, and how do we asset map, and how do we match it? So those were sort of the primary thing. I guess the other thing I should say is that the religious community is really good, as you can imagine, at the kind of mutual aid piece. The other piece that we recognized pretty early on is that the people who were the rapid responders, many of them were queer folks who were very young and not religiously aligned, and experiencing enormous amounts of trauma on a daily basis. And so we started a nightly Zoom spiritual support and care kind of half an hour worship service that we just rotated leadership for, that was multi-faith. And we also started holding services for people to witness people's stories, to try and help hold each other in the grief and the trauma. Yeah, I think I'll stop there. Does that, or do people have any other kind of specific questions about what happened and how we kind of responded? I know you have 4 other questions, Diane, but I don't know if there are any specific honing in relationship to that question.
I guess I would just insert the question of if you had the privilege that we do of maybe seeing this coming, what do
Yes.
you wish that you had known beforehand that would help us be better prepared?
I actually feel I don't feel like we have a lot of regrets. I would and not necessarily I wish we had known before. Um I think I would lean into being ready with having of like relationship mapping and knowing, what are the existing connectors between immigrant communities and churches. What sort of BIPOC and immigrant-led organizations are you already in followership of, so that you can be doing what is actually helpful to immigrant communities? And I think, I guess very concretely, um, because Lyndale already had the Center for Sustainable Justice, and we had a history of doing kind of fiscal sponsorship and, the ability to do pass-through funds. I think meeting with your councils and being prepared. There were a number of churches who ended up not being able to do mutual aid because they had to spend like three different council meetings um, being comfortable with doing pass-through monies. And one of the pieces that churches are allowed to do is to give money to individuals. And so that's a kind of unique skill that other nonprofits can't do. So I would also encourage you to sort of get ready with your financial systems if you feel like you are positioned and are willing to do both the receiving of funds and like set up, like we used GiveButter, and I know a number of other places have used GiveButter as the mechanism to receive mutual aid, and then figuring out the systems to be able to disperse monies. I feel like those are the two core pieces that I would really point toward.
Thanks. Is there anything else, or can we wait? Some of the questions can maybe wait until the end too, when we have more time.
Great. I did see one in the chat, but
Okay.
maybe we'll go through do
Okay.
you want to do the prepared ones and then
Sure.
come back to that?
I
Great.
think the second one you kind of already answered, so maybe we'll skip to the question 3. How did this experience affect Lyndale, the congregation, emotionally, spiritually, and relationally, and how did you care for people in the aftermath?
Yeah. Oof, such a great question. Well, first of all, Lyndale UCC is in a building with two other congregations, which together are known as Springhouse Ministry Center. And we share a building and we have three different sanctuaries. And so, in some ways, I would answer the question not just about Lyndale, but the other two churches as well. And the other thing I should say is Alex Preddy, who was the second citizen murdered by ICE agents, was killed about 6 blocks from Lyndale, from Springhouse. And so the morning he was killed in the morning of Saturday, I think it was the 24th of January, and then ICE agents responded by using tear gas and this green gas that's actually illegal in foreign countries. It's deeply carcinogenic, but they deployed this green gas and people literally witnessed the murder and then fled. And a lot of those folks literally fled into Springhouse's building. And I will say, one of the things, and then we had an aid station at the church where we actually already had gas masks, and so we were handing out gas masks, and we had a medic station, and so I would say that I was deeply grateful that Lyndale and Springhouse has been a sanctuary supporting and immigrant welcoming congregation since 2016. And we had I feel really grateful that we had done some work to prepare us to be able to really pivot to like the question of how can we be most helpful, both in terms of our physical building, and we also set up a pastoral care station, and we had members of all three congregations signing up to, be making soup for rapid responders, and to staff the medic station, and to staff the aid station, and to be there to provide pastoral care. And my guess is that probably 90% of Lyndale and Springhouse members were engaged in some way. And the other thing is that there was this beautiful, I didn't even talk about singing resistance. But the other piece of, this again, kind of bubbling up, this, I know that you've heard these beautiful songs. And so even the people in the congregation who didn't feel like they could be doing rapid response or being on the whistle patrols felt like they could make soup, and they could staff the aid station, and they could be trained by singing resistance, and they could walk through the neighborhood singing songs to our neighbors who were in hiding. And so one of the pieces that I feel like is really beautiful about our story is that there were so many ways that people could fit in, like get in where you fit in. And there was a very, so often with justice movements, the bar is very high, and you have to have all the right language, and you have to have all these specialized skills. And that was not the case. And so I think almost everybody in the congregation was at least adjacent to both the resistance and the trauma of the whole ordeal. And so how I will say that Advent and Ash Wednesday and Lent and Holy Week have never held more meaning in my ministry than they have sort of the ancient faith story is such a beautiful container and so parallel to what we're experiencing here. And the ways in which we have really sought to have all of our worship services very intentionally having sort of expanded prayer time, really leaning into, like, we've used some of the singing resistance music as part of our worship services, the kind of really being aware of the importance of collective grief, and making space for that, and leaning into this sort of, I had a seminary professor that said you ought never preach crucifixion without resurrection, and you ought never preach resurrection without crucifixion, that these are intertwined realities. And the way in which we didn't shy away from naming the horror of the moment, but we also wanted to be lifting up the ways in which resistance and life were meeting every attempt at death that was happening around us. And the ways in which um, I really feel in love with all of our movement here, the ways in which religious ritual was really offered in a non-proselytizing way um, uh, to the community. So, for instance, um, in this brilliant move, Alex Preddy, as I say, was murdered in the morning of January 24th. That night at 7 p.m., um, there was the call went out that everybody should stand on their street corner and light candles. And I had been at church that whole day, staffing people running in, and it was freezing cold. It was also like, I don't know, 25 below zero, with the air temperature. So we were really trying to and that day, that evening, the National Guard cordoned off the neighborhood, including the church. And so like I drove home past all of these armored vehicles from the National Guard, and like the horror was right there. And then I'm gonna tear up. And then I turned the corner and I started passing corner after corner after corner of people holding lights and, holding each other and praying spontaneously. And then the next Saturday, all the lakes are frozen, and the lake near my house, Lake Nokomis, I don't know, 1,000 of my neighbors went out and with their, boots, shuffled and wrote ice out of MN. And it's a lake that the people, like when you're flying into the airport, you fly over or, over it. And in where they had etched that out, they put thousands of candles. So all the planes flying in and out of Minnesota, of the airport, look down on ice out of Minnesota. And like the lighting of candles is a deeply religious ritual that there was this permeability between kind of spiritual care and religious ritual and the community. And that repeated itself every, I don't know, it was maybe 2 months, every Saturday evening at 7 p.m. We repeated that ritual. And so, and then I will say one more thing and during Holy Week, um, uh, religious leaders were involved we sued the Department of Homeland Security, the Minneapolis Area Synod of the ELCA, the Minnesota Conference of the UCC, and one Catholic priest. And Susie Hayward and I kind of did primary organizing around that. And so we organized a Maundy, Thursday foot washing outside of the Whipple building. And we actually won a temporary injunction so that clergy could, in fact, because they were blocking us from providing pastoral care to all these detainees. So we won that, and we did a Maundy, Thursday foot washing service where we washed the feet of those people who were going in to provide pastoral care. And the power of like that Maundy, Thursday story to wash the feet of people going in to then provide pastoral care. And then the next day on Good Friday, we did a Good Friday pilgrimage to modern sites of crucifixion. And we went from the George Floyd Square to the Renee Good Memorial and to the Alex Preddy Memorial. And that was for, I mean, many of our parishioners participated in those services. And again, that kind of permeability, it was a space for grief and solidarity and hope. And then, Easter morning was, that claiming that love and life are always stronger than death and cruelty. Yeah, and I would say we're still in it, that holding each other in that collective grieving process is critically important.
will say that I was grieving and so moved watching all the videos and stuff that I saw on Instagram, that was kind of healing for me too, that there was the good stuff going on too, how amazing you all were. That was like, so before I do one last big question, somebody has been asking about divining relationship mapping.
Yeah. I literally uh that's an exercise where you people I would invite you to, I don't know if it's if there's an immigrant welcoming task force, if it's the pastoral staff and your justice team, but literally like writing down. So at Lyndale, we have a fairly long-term relationship with immigrant-led union called SATUL, and we have one of our members is part of MIRAC, which is the Minnesota Immigrant Rights Action Coalition, and so like literally when I mean like mapping, just writing down what are the BIPOC and immigrant-led organizations and or leaders that your congregation has some sort of relationship of followership or solidarity with. Um, and if there aren't very many, then the question is, what are the existing immigrant and BIPOC led organizations in your area that you can start attending the events that they're holding and start. I mean, I noticed somebody asked about training, legal observer training, non-cooperation training. Those are sort of two of the primary ones. And many of the immigrant-led organizations are offering those kinds of trainings and just, get as many members trained up as possible. And part of those early trainings that we held, and we actually hosted MIRAC, the Minnesota Immigrant Rights Action Committee, hosted a number of the trainings in our building. So that was another way that we could offer our space and our hospitality to support the trainings. But just that sort of putting ourselves in intentional followership of that Ayanna Pressley wisdom of those closest to the pain ought be closest to the power. And in this moment, following the leadership of immigrant and BIPOC led organizations. I think the other thing to say about that, which I didn't say earlier, is that the other part of the Minnesota story, which I'm so like in love with us around as well, is this is not a story of like charismatic leadership. There isn't one person that you can point to in Minnesota. It really is this leader-full movement, and that besides the relationship mapping, part of the trainings that I at least was a part of was inviting everybody to start thinking through, when this happens, what can I bring to the movement? Like, what's my little part so that, so that it's a collective movement, a leader-full movement.
Perfect. Thank you. So one of the other questions was, how did you discern what faithfulness looked like in that moment? I think you kind of talked about that, but maybe you'll add something to it, especially when legal realities, safety concerns, and your call to welcome probably all felt in tension.
Yeah, it's a great question. I feel really, really grateful. I would point to what I said at the beginning around many religious leaders. Like for instance, I would say one of my primary organizing communities here in the Twin Cities is an organization called March, Multi-Faith, Anti-Racism, Change and Healing. And it's a very multi-faith, very pro-LGBTQ, very committed to sort of the intersection and focusing on kind of dismantling white supremacy. And that organization has been around since 1991. And that was a community that since Jamar Clark was murdered has really collectively been in followership of the movement for Black Lives and a lot of the indigenous organizing. And so, and one of the things that we did together was work on the Poor People's Campaign. And so we had a lot of experience about being asked to consider our level of risk and understand what our relationship was to nonviolent direct action, to the possibility of being arrested, and to begin to consider questions of danger and safety around state violence, honestly. And so I do feel like I feel like I have spent a lot of my life understanding that my call to discipleship is intimately woven for me. I'm not saying for anybody else. For me, with the practice of nonviolent direct action, with when various BIPOC organizations have asked March and particularly white-bodied folks to put our bodies between, like the die-in at the Mall of America, and the police. And we were asked to stand between state violence and the people who are being affected. And I know, for instance, like I think it was the Catholic diocese, the bishop in New Hampshire wrote a letter to all of the clergy and said, now is a time when I really want all of you to start to prepare your wills and be prepared that you might be called into martyrdom. And I know that sounds really dramatic, but it is one of those moments, I feel like, where we're really called to answer that question for ourselves. To what are we called in the service of the gospel? And so I would, that was really paired with I spent some time as part of the accompaniment movement in El Salvador in the 1980s, and I have not experienced, that was in the middle of the Civil War, I have not experienced that kind of visible state violence since my experience in El Salvador. But like my experience in El Salvador and the movement, the liberation theology movement in El Salvador, and Archbishop Oscar Romero, and some, if folks are familiar with that, my faith has never been more alive. The relevancy, the power, the balm, the inspiration, it is truly, and that's been mostly what I have, and I've heard many, many, many others say the same thing. That has been more the leading edge than the fear.
Yeah. The last question was about churches beginning to prepare for potential ICE interaction, but I feel like you've already kind of spoken to that. So maybe we should switch to opening it up for questions for other people to see if there's other things. Did you have something else you wanted to say?
Oh, can I just add two very concrete pieces?
Yes.
I would really encourage you to think about two things. One is like signage. If you all have made the like I would first of all encourage you to be thinking through what is your collective decision around your relationship with ICE. So we because we had done a sanctuary supporting and immigrant welcoming process, we had sort of taken those votes. And so we were able, there's like, I would encourage you to look into some of the legalities, but unless there is a judicial warrant, you are allowed to prevent people from entering your building. And so we came up with a policy of locking our doors at all times and having signage that, ICE were not welcome unless they had a judicial warrant, and also designating parts of our church as private spaces. And we also have a sign in our parking lot that explicitly forbids ICE from staging from our parking lot. And so I would encourage you to kind of think through, and I would say lean on the bucket brigade. Like, Los Angeles, Portland, Chicago, and Minneapolis have been through this. Like, we're happy to send verbiage your way.
Okay, that's awesome, because we have, at least at Wash Park, started to talk about and put some signage up already about that they're not welcome. So that's good to know that you guys did that too. Did you have any legal, like, did you have somebody on on queue if you needed legal help through church or for yourselves or?
Yes, and I would say, particularly the mutual aid stuff, we have retained an attorney just to consult because we're 100% sure that we will be audited. And so, and part of it is, particularly with the mutual aid stuff, everybody is just making it up. So, like, we have one small neighborhood mutual aid group that has gotten affidavits from everybody who has received money. And we just have their initials, and uh, but we have that, this amount of money for rental assistance for these person with their initials and like signed affidavits. And so that kind of came out of, talking with both an accountant and an attorney, neither of whom know exactly what the answers are, but, trying to have as many, intentional processes so as to limit our legal exposure.
Perfect. Thank you. So I know Allison was going to lead this part. Are you ready, Allison, to open it up for the Q&A?
Yeah. For about the next 20 minutes, we're going to be doing a Q&A session. And here's how we're going to do it. If anybody here has a question, I will ask that you raise your mechanical hand, and that bumps you to the top of the queue so we can see that you have a question. If you don't know how to do that, go down to your React button, click on that, and there's a bar that says raise hand. And then when you're called on, you can unmute, ask your question, and when that is finished, then lower your hand and mute yourself. But and if for some reason, like you're on a phone and you don't have a React button, or for some reason can't raise your mechanical hand, type it into the chat, and our tech host will make sure the question gets sent on. I know Jim Fritz had some questions. I want to make sure, Jim, that you get your mechanical hand raised if you still have a question. So, and do please mute when you're done with your question. So, thank you, Rebecca, for being willing to field all, hopefully, the spontaneous questions. So raise your hands when you. Okay, looks like Gus Burkhardt.
Yes, Rebecca, how did you organize your staff to complete all these various tasks that were confronting you during that time?
Um, well, we do on a regular basis meet as both a Lyndale staff and a Springhouse staff. And so we devoted our meeting times to a lot of this work. The other piece that was really deeply grateful, I feel really grateful for, we early on in the surge, my colleague T. Michael and I, who are the pastoral staff at Lyndale, um, met with both the council and personnel and with our kind of social justice forum, our people involved in social justice, and talked explicitly about like how many hours are we going to be devoting to this. And both personnel and council said to both of us, your job description includes providing leadership and working around justice issues. And so they gave us permission to spend as much time as we discerned we needed to be spending on this work. And we also we have several ordained people. We have about 6 members of our congregation who are in four-way covenants. And so they offered to lead worship during the surge time. We also had clergy colleagues who were not in parish positions offered to lead worship. And so both T. Michael and I mean, I think in January and February, it's probably fair to say that we were 30 hours a week, kind of doing work around the surge and responding to it. But we had gotten the sort of support and explicit go ahead and permission, I guess, from the congregation. And so in that 30 hours, a lot of it was just logistical. Like, for instance, T. Michael created a spreadsheet so that people could sign up to be at the aid station and and so the pastoral staff literally took shifts and signed up on Google Forms and that kind of thing. So it's not very sexy. It was, concrete logistical work, but we set aside time so that we could be doing it. Yeah. Does that answer your question, Gus?
Thank you.
There is Jim asked the question about in Colorado, we need to know about the Rapid Response Network, which is the Colorado Rapid Response Network, or CORN. I could look up the phone number and type it in the chat if that would be helpful. But these are people out, they're not necessarily folks in our church, but it's a whole organization. Any other? Oh, Wayne, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you so much, Rebecca, for spending your time. The stories are heartbreaking and heartwarming at the same time. A question concerning the mutual aid in all the various faith communities and organizations that were doing the mutual aid. Was there some kind of network? Was there a nexus or a hub that was doing the coordination and the sharing of resources, or were each kind of just working independently?
It's I mean, so much of this is relationally based. So I'll give you an example. Like Minnesota Together, our mutual aid fund, that was part of Lyndale UCC, that Lyndale UCC hosted in relationship with March, Multi-Faith Anti-Racism Change and Healing. And so we early on, when we started receiving monies, we looked to about 7 partners to be to disperse the monies through. And so, for instance, there's a San Pablo, St. Paul's Lutheran Church is a predominantly Latinx congregation, the pastor of which is married to the interim at First Christian, which is part of Springhouse. And we knew that they were, doing a lot of work and were doing like legal support as well as food, as well as rental assistance. So that was one of the organizations to whom we directed funds through Minnesota Together. The All Nations Indian Church, which one of the greatest ironies is a lot of indigenous people got picked up. There is still one Lakota man who has disappeared. We still don't know where he is. And Kelly Sherman Conroy, who's the pastor of All Nations Indian Church, which is a UCC and ELCA affiliated congregation in very close to where Lyndale is, was followed by ICE twice to her home and to the church. There were ICE agents sitting outside church that snatched some people as they were trying to get to church. So All Nations became an aid station, as well as that was another place that we do a lot of work with All Nations. That was another recipient of. So there wasn't like the, association of mutual aid providers that met periodically. That kind of connection didn't happen. But, like DHH which is Dios Habla Hoy, which is a Latinx Spanish-speaking congregation, at the height of the surge was serving 25,000 families a week. And people had relationships. Pastor Sergio from DHH has been on MS Now, and like it was on NPR. And so, and the people who started Neighbors Helping Neighbors were two steering committee members for multi-faith anti-racism change and healing. So, and they grew, Neighbors Helping Neighbors grew to be this huge model. So I guess what I'm saying is that there was a lot of relational connective tissue in the network, that not kind of formal coordination, but a lot of trust based in those years of relationship that sort of was the web that connected us all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Before we get to the next question, I just wanted to say the phone number for the Colorado Rapid Response Network is in the chat, and Ruth Ann has also sent us a link to the website. So make sure you check that out in the chat. We do have a question. Bev, I saw Bev's got her hand up. There was a previous question in the chat, and you may have answered some of this. What types of categories of BIPOC and immigrant-led organizations did you pursue relationships with, and what types do you find the most effective to collaborate with?
We really leaned into our existing relationships. So I don't know if this is meaningful, but, I mentioned before MIRAC and CETUL, the Comité Trabajadores Unidos en Lucha, which, we've had a lot of connection with those and both of those are, kind of trans community, like there are many immigrant communities represented in both of those organizations. They're not only Latinx or only API or only Somali. We did early on particularly seek out relationship with Somali leadership because I forgot to say this early on. You might recall that the excuse for all of this was calling the Somali community garbage, and pointing to a fraud case that was incidentally led by a white woman who was born in the United States and that had been resolved 3 years ago. So, but there was a lot of intentional work with various imams and particularly the Somali Muslim community in town. And that was particularly because of the excuse for the surge.
Thank you. We will have Bev and then a chat question and then Kathy Carfrey. So Bev.
My question is that you had a lot of need there, and you had with the mutual aid, and you had a lot of money coming through, but probably not sufficient to meet all the needs. How did you make decisions on who got the money and who got the aid?
Well, I feel like we were shielded somewhat from that question. My colleagues at Neighbors Helping Neighbors are the one. So our model was to receive monies from all over the country and to then send it to the 7 organizations that were doing the direct dispersal of the monies. I know that, for instance, most of the mutual aid funds were first come, first serve. And I think part of the grief and horror of this time are the people who we were not able to help. And we're in the middle of an eviction crisis right now because of and the the people who got deported that we weren't able to get an attorney to help with. Yeah, I can't even. Yeah, it is remains deeply traumatic.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Jenny had a question in the chat. You may have touched on some of this. She says you talked about following by BIPOC and immigrant-led efforts, which sounded by your examples as nonprofits. I'm curious what pre-existing relationships there were between predominantly non-immigrant congregations and predominantly immigrant congregations. Here in Metro Denver, Colorado, this is one of the big gaps we've identified. There are not significant relationships across these congregations, and our immigrant-led nonprofits have named they don't have pre-existing relationships with predominantly immigrant congregations. Just curious how it compares to your experience of pre-existing relationships, congregation to congregation.
Well, I would say that is a kind of relationship mapping thing that you've identified a whole. And if it were me, that's where I would start my efforts, like right now, yesterday. I think it is slightly different than here in the Twin Cities. Like as I say, San Pablo, DHH are both predominantly immigrant congregations. We have a kind of a PICO based organization called Isaiah that has we actually right at the beginning of Metro Surge, not connected to Operation Metro Surge, but they were able to we had 5,000 people at the convention center planning for legislative action and also around democracy protection. So I do think that there's a fairly robust and a good chunk of the Isaiah relationships. They have a Muslim coalition, and so there's a lot of really well-organized leadership in the Muslim community, particularly the Somali community, the CARE, Council on American Islamic Relations. Minnesota is a very strong organization. There's the Islamic Center of Minnesota is a very strong organization. So, oh, good. Thank you, Jenny. Yeah, so I don't know. I think if there's even nascent, models of those relationships in the Denver area, I would be mapping where even the baby ones exist and how can you bring energy and funding to those efforts.
Thank you. Kathy Carfrey has her hand up.
Um, I think that the administration sadly learned some lessons, or maybe gratefully learned some lessons, but now things are going to be much more stealth and much harder to track. When you describe, SUVs coming out of a building and people take, it's not going to be that way anymore. So I'm imagining it's already not that way in Minneapolis. And what are you doing now that things have gone much more underground? I'm just using that word. How can we observe? How can we have people where they need to be when it's not the big surge?
It's a great question. I 1000% agree with you. I feel like the other thing I need to say, which is maybe silly at this moment, but we were super clear that this was actually never about immigration. Um, if it were really about immigration, the surges would have been in Texas and Florida. Like our immigrant population in the Twin Cities is minuscule compared to other parts of the country. And I think honestly there are like 80,000 um Somali folks in the Twin Cities, and there are uh something like 150 people in the Somali community who aren't either green card holders or citizens. I mean, it's like minuscule amount, like that this is really an effort to do a training run around uh, around attacking the election and getting people inured to the fact of troops in the used domestically. And so, but having said that, we have a lot less people who are like following ICE vehicles around. There's a lot less like rapid response, but we are still doing things like driving people to work and having people on patrol. Like we're still every Friday, there are all the mosques in town. There are non-Muslim people, providing kind of security and presence. The same at schools. So there's a lot less of the sort of reactive and more sort of like the continued accompaniment and sort of protective pieces that I think are still important to do. And I feel like that's something that's replicable, even as like so for instance, last week or maybe 10 days ago, they had two white ICE women who were uh, targeting an immigrant they knew who was a mechanic. And so they had them in plain clothes knock on his door and say that their car had broken down and could he help them with their car. And he walks out his door to be a good neighbor, and they snatched him. And so, yeah, it is ongoing here. It is they've learned. They've gone underground and it is now stealth. And some of that we can't quite figure out how to be proactive around. But we're also moving toward there are far fewer people in detention, but there are still, I think the number is close to 600 people who are detained in Dilley, Texas, from Minnesota. And so we're also looking at how do we bring our neighbors home? That's another part of our kind of faith-based work that is our responsibility to be working on.
That was helpful, what you said. And I think you also that you identified that gap where our congregations need to start making connections with other congregations that are different than ours, because we're going to get information and ways to be helpful there. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Well, and I mean, I know we've said this earlier tonight, but it is not sort of in our natural repertoire as churches to be in followership of secular organizers. But I really think that part of the special sauce here in Minnesota was, again, that kind of permeability of like what's sacred and what is secular, you know, wasn't we were all doing sacred work. And
Yeah.
so I don't know. I mean, I think the immigrant congregation question is critical from what I hear you saying, but I would also encourage you to like map the secular immigration organizations too.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
We're getting close to our end of our time here. I don't see any other hands up. Now's your chance to raise your mechanical hand or type in the chat. We're going to be finishing up pretty soon.
Allison, can I say one more thing? If and like,
Yes,
please
you
raise your hand and interrupt
have to
me
raise your hand first.
if
You
other
may.
people have questions. Um, well, one of the things that I did not talk about is that March, Multi-Faith Anti-Racism Change and Healing, hosted a gathering where we invited out of town clergy, um, multi-faith across the board. And we got 700 people. We literally had the idea, and 5 days later, we had 1,400 people who wanted to be there, and we could only say yes to 700. Now that was specific about, Renee Good had been murdered. It was 2 days before Alex Preddy was murdered. So there was a lot of national attention on Minneapolis, and so it is likely that, you know, you wouldn't have that kind of response, but we have been really focusing on the bucket brigade and the faith-based organizing that happened in Los Angeles, that and then sent information to Portland and to Chicago, and that we really drew on, like the lawsuit I talked about earlier. We did that based on the lawsuit that the Catholic Archdiocese brought against the Broadview Center in Chicago. And so I guess I would say, as you are doing organizing, don't hesitate to put out an invitation, even if it's a virtual thing. Like, it would be great if faith-based organizers from LA, Chicago, Portland, Memphis, Minneapolis, and people in Denver met together and spent 3 or 4 hours like exchanging information. We're looking into how could we form kind of sister city relationships with places where people are taken and places where people are being detained. And how can we, we have a delegation that's going to go to Dilley, for instance, and do some training. So, like, I would really encourage you to be both intentionally calling us to come to y'all, and also, like, if there are specific things that you're witnessing in other cities that seem smart, I would really encourage you to keep reaching out and gleaning the information from folks.
That's great. Yeah. Part of our mapping is beyond our own state.
Perfect. Yes.
Yeah. And Wayne has said in chat, we have a GEO detention center here in Aurora, which, is. We have one last question. It looks like, Kathy, you've got, okay. And
Did you coordinate or organize with the colleges?
Oh, that's a great question. Not explicitly. I will say that most of the rapid response was done by people who are college age or a little older. So we didn't do explicit organizing on campuses, but they were already doing the rapid response. Yeah. I will say, like, for instance, one of the clergy people who came to January 22nd, the 22nd, 23rd event that we hosted in March she's a campus minister. She did an alternative spring break where she brought people and we did a pilgrimage with her from Bidote to George Floyd Square to Renee Good to Alex Preddy. So she went back and mapped it, to the college campuses, but we haven't done that explicitly. I think that's an excellent idea.
Well, and there are workers on the college campuses who could very much be at risk. And are they being protected? Is a question.
Excellent. Yes.
Well, I think we are closing down. Rebecca, thank you. You, and the whole city of Minneapolis. And to all of you on Zoom, first, thank you for coming. But also, and one way we can express our gratitude for Rebecca, your time and your wisdom, is we're going to be taking up a love offering. There is a link to donate to Lyndale UCC, and this was our idea. So, and if you want to click on that link, you can then find a space where it says Lyndale UCC, and you can click on that and make your donation specifically to Lyndale UCC, just out of gratitude and to encourage your good work. Thank you. And we'll pass this on to Reverend Dr. Jenny Witcher, who will close us out.
Thank you. I am here to share a little bit of what's already going on here for folks who are super energized by listening to Reverend Dr. Rebecca. We have a very different civic history and structure and culture in Colorado. So that's why I was raising that in terms of what's already here, where there's gaps and work to be done. So we started about a year ago the Mutual Aid Sanctuary, which is a multi-faith ecumenical congregation-based organizing to protect, provide mutual aid and support and protect immigrants, LGBTQ, people seeking reproductive health care, POC, people that are targets, broadly defined. And one of the programs that we launched a couple of months ago in partnership with Casa de Paz, which is a local nonprofit, is the Post-Detention Assistance Program, which is for folks. So Wayne is one of my co-organizers, put in the chat the GEO facility in Aurora. When folks are released, they have a judge has released them and they have paperwork and they've told the judge where they're going. They have to go to a specific address. And ICE will intentionally release them late at night where they can't get a bus to said destination, or family members and friends can't come get them that quickly. So we have been organizing, in particular faith communities, but anybody could be part of it, folks to host folks for 1 to 3 nights. It's short term. And there's a number of volunteer roles that can be a part of that. And we've been doing that already, but we need more hosts. So people that have an extra bedroom or a safe place where someone could stay. And just to note, like, there's a diversity of people in detention that includes trans folks. So if you are a trans friendly household, that's important for us to know. And that's all in our forms. We have like application forms you can fill out. And that's to the Mutual Aid Sanctuary. And then a couple of other things. We are working with a variety of nonprofits that have been doing this work for a long time and been in conversation for a long time and learning and listening and keeping track of where they're identifying needs and where faith communities might fit in. And that's where that question about we don't have a lot of congregation to congregation relationships, which could be a really strong support structure. That is a gap where the nonprofit sector also doesn't have a lot those relationships. So we have some ideas that we'll share soon, I think, about how we're going to launch some relationship building structures, like habits and practices structure. We're also working to build a resource hub, the Mutual Aid Sanctuary. We currently have an online training available, slides for preparing congregations for ICE enforcement activities. It talks a lot about some of the things Reverend Dr. Rebecca brought up around signage, private versus public space, determining those things. We also have folks like Wayne, who's in the room today, who are willing to lead those trainings for congregations and communities. But the training is fully available on our website. We also have sample sign for congregations, which is a little different from what's normally available. Is very like aggressive anti-ICE. And most of the people that are going to see that sign on your congregation are like community members, not ICE. So like we included our mission statement, right, of the congregation, and it being welcoming, but also holding a really clear boundary, who's not invited in, and what you need to come in terms of a signed judicial warrant. So those are some of the things we are planning to develop. Additional trainings. This call will be on our website as well, the recording. We're open if you have questions that you want certain trainings, please let us know. And I'd say the same for Rebecca, if there's suggestions. We already have Corn that's been mentioned in the chat that does confirmer training and legal observer training. And their legal observer is hand in hand with ACL. ACLU is the one that actually does the training, the local ACLU, because legal observer, if you've done it before, it's different now for this specific situation. There are different rules of engagement for legal observers. So do it again through Corn. And also know your rights training, of course. And I know they have other trainings. They will continue to build them as they're needed. I'm checking my notes. We also have launched in January, I think it was, the Colorado Clergy Alliance. There has not prior been a clergy-led organizing group of clergy, which is different. Clergy respond a little differently than when others try and organize them. We now have 150 members in Colorado. So there's been a great response. We are working to train up folks, or already started training and prepare clergy to do nonviolent civil disobedience and direct action. As part of that, we are fundraising to get a legal retainer with a Meyer law firm, which specializes in immigration and criminal defense, so that we are strategizing with legal counsel and have informed consent for people who are participating in actions, and are doing our best to avoid major consequences in terms of how we structure our major consequences for individuals, like felony, that kind of thing, and how we structure our actions. That legal counsel is also something we're trying to bring to bear for wider like faith communities in terms of running through with them trainings and like guidance, so that it has gone through legal counsel for what we put out, even though we can't give legal guidance in that way. So there's a lot of resourcing there that's going to be happening. We are planning to develop a legal defense fund and a bail fund as well. Sorry, I'm like quickly scanning my notes so I don't forget anything. There is like a number of things we can do together. And I just want to encourage people, if you go to mutualaidsanctuary.org and sign up for the newsletter, on that website is also the Colorado Clergy Alliance to sign up for that. And we're vetting that list. If you sign up, you get vetted. So you might hear from us if we don't know you. But sign up so you're getting our emails because we're not putting like public notification of engagement opportunities on our website. We are posting resources to the website, but the invitations are internal communication. So that's how to hear from us. And also, we'd love to get your feedback on what you need from us. I think that's a lot of it. There's more, but yeah, Signal chat groups. We also have the same level 1 through 4 that y'all have has already happened here. So if folks aren't familiar with that, there are in Signal, there's levels 1 through 4, and it is like further and further vetted. So it's neighborhood, and then it gets more and more vetted in terms of how deeply you can get what level you're in. Those Signal groups are already existing in Metro Denver. I believe beyond Metro Denver, I just don't know everywhere in Colorado yet where that's mapped out. But those are operational, like in my neighborhood, they are doing whistle kits. They meet every weekend. They do whistle kits, distribution of whistle kits, training, like also just organize locally. Like I and another or someone who happens to be an organizer in another nonprofit, our kids are in the same daycare, which is a Spanish speaking daycare. We have been organizing the parents, right? Who are mixed in terms of identity, to have rapid response safe houses to protect staff and kids in case of some kind of surge or whatever situation may happen, whether it's a full surge of the city or just a location-based situation. So that's part of the power mapping, relationship mapping that Reverend Dr. Rebecca was talking about, is really hyper-localized, and we say that and then it is confusing, right? Like, I understand that that sounds vague, but you gave a great example, Rebecca, of the person that went 2 blocks from their house, right? Door knocking, right? What are the institutions you're connected to already? And what conversations do you need to have? And I think a lot of folks are sometimes afraid to bring up the conversation, like white folks in particular, are afraid to bring up the conversation with people of color or immigrant people because they don't want to cause harm. The greater harm is not doing that. And when I brought up, like I met with the director of the school and I said, this is a tough conversation, but it's important to me that we have it. And I said, I am an organizer. I'm happy to organize, but I want to know where you're at. How are you feeling? What are you already doing? What do you need? And she broke down in tears and was so grateful that someone had raised something, because it is scary to talk about, but it needs to be, right? Like they're living in constant fear. So I just want to encourage folks to have those difficult conversations. Yeah, thank you.
Nicole, Pastor Nicole, do you have a few closing words you want to send us out with, or you?
Absolutely. I won't keep y'all any longer. I just want to express deep gratitude, Rebecca, for giving us this time and giving us the wisdom, and for all the folks who gathered tonight to learn. That in and of itself is a source of hope to me. So we deeply appreciate all the good work that you're doing, and hope we get to continue to support you in it, and hope that we are not in a position to have to put all of this wisdom into practice, but I know we'll be better prepared for it if we have to.
Well, thank you. I can't tell you how grateful I am. And any community that Diane and Scott Peterson are part of is a beloved community. And so thank you so much.
We're really grateful that we get to have them, although we recognize what a loss that would be to your congregation. So many blessings on everything you guys have going on, and also just prayers for your perseverance and encouragement on the path, and hopefully some rest in your future as hopefully we enter a season of more peace.
From your lips to God's ears, and deep gratitude. Thank you.
Thank you all.